Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Newly declassified US documents indicate the orders for the 2004 poisoning of then-candidate and later Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko came directly from Moscow. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, has a track record of trying to murder those who pose a threat to the regime, even outside their own borders. To name a few of his victims, journalist Anna Politkovskaya was shot in 2006 after criticizing the Chechen War. That same year, former KGB spy Alexander Litvinenko died of radiation poisoning in London. Opposition politician Boris Nemtsov was shot dead on a bridge in Moscow in 2015, and the list goes on. What does the use of assassination in such a prolific way tell us about Putin's ambition and state of mind? To explore this, I'm joined by Peter Dickinson. He's chief editor, Business Ukraine magazine. Mr. Dickinson, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, what does this tell us, this method of retaining power? What does this tell us about Putin's strategy, his way of thinking, and that of his cabal?
Well, if we look at these assassinations, many of them are done very, very openly, I would say. This news now is being treated as something of confirmation, really. But Putin's responsibility for these killings has long been assumed, I would suggest. I think that they are used by the Kremlin to send a message, first and foremost, to the wider Russian public and to the Russian authorities, to members of the Russian establishment, that they will be punished if they try to go against the Kremlin, against Putin. And of course, he uses that also in the wider post-Soviet sphere. Of course, the primary example here being the poisoning, presumed attempted murder of Viktor Yushchenko back in 2004. So I think these are the Kremlin almost wants us to know that they do this. Stalin killed millions. Putin's approach is different. He kills people very publicly to send a message to others that they are also not safe, and they must toe the line, essentially. They must behave themselves if they wish to avoid a similar fate.
Understood. But, many of the victims, because as I said earlier, the list is long. Many of the people that have, died under mysterious circumstances, falling out of hotel windows and so on, don't seem at first glance to be a threat to Putin's power. A ballet dancer, for example, being an example. Is Putin getting overly paranoid?
Well, that could be the case. But I think the example you cite in particular, the ballet dancer, in Russia, they're celebrities, ballet dancers. He was a public figure, and he had spoken out against the war. He'd made anti-war statements. He'd made critical comments. So he is a very good example, I think, of Russia saying, of Putin rather saying, OK, let's make an example of this individual so that everybody else who is a public figure in Russia also understands that if they speak out against the war, there will be a price to pay. I think that that's the message from most of these killings. Now, it may be over the top. You may be quite right. Putin may be overly paranoid, but this is his method of controlling people. If we go back to 2006 and look at the killing of Litvinenko in London, this very famous poisoning with the nuclear weapon, nuclear weapons rather, this polonium poison. That was a very public execution done in London, in the centre of London, to send a message to all of Russia's diaspora around the world that you're not safe anywhere. It was done very deliberately with polonium. I mean, they could have killed him. They could have shot him. They could have run him over. They could have done all sorts of things to eliminate this person. But they chose to do it in a way in which everyone would know it was Russia. Although, of course, they deny it publicly, in order to send a message that this is us, and if you cross us, you will have the same. You will suffer the same fate.
Indeed, and the assassins were were actually, lauded when they got back to Russia and so on. Sergei Skripal and his daughter are another example of dissidents whose death was attempted, assassination was attempted through the use of radioactivity. Shifting gears a little bit, Peter, the hypersonic ballistic missile that Putin fired at Dnipro yesterday. What's the response been like in Ukraine of that?
Well, I think Ukrainians are. I mean, there was initial a degree of shock, certainly a degree of alarm. It was seen as something. It was seen as a very clear message to Ukrainians, a threat, as it were. But I think that there was also a sense amongst many of the people that I've spoken to and heard from in the past few days that they see this as really primarily a signal to the West, almost an attempt to intimidate Western audiences. Ukraine has been hit by more than 10,000 missiles since this war began. Some of them have the capacity to carry nuclear weapons. This was not, in that sense, unprecedented. But it was clearly designed to cause headlines and to send a message to spark alarm across the Western world. And I think to a degree it succeeded in achieving that. But the Ukrainians are kind of, I wouldn't say fatalistic, but certainly they accept this is the reality of the war. Russia is going to bomb. They're going to use different types of missiles. There is really it doesn't change Ukraine's resolve, and it doesn't change the realities that Ukraine faces. They have to go on. So I think the biggest impact here was really in the international arena.
Yes, well, speaking of the international arena, a very strong statement from the French foreign minister, who's basically said, well, we're standing by Ukraine for as long as it takes until the Ukrainians are willing to talk peace. How is that being received in Ukraine?
The comments from the French foreign minister were very timely, very well received. I think he made a point of coming out with this statement after Russia's use of this ballistic missile, almost to say, okay, we're not going to back down. We're not intimidated. And we're not going to allow Russia to set the agenda in this manner. So certainly it was a strong message, and of course it was accompanied by the very clear signalling that, first of all, France would allow Ukraine to use French missiles inside Russia, which is a crucial request Ukraine has been making for a long, long time. And they've now, of course, received the green light from the Americans and the British, and now the French as well, to do so. And also the French saying that, there can be no restrictions on Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Now, that's something that was very well received in Kiev and across Ukraine. Ukrainians have been saying for a long time, we cannot be expected to defend ourselves whilst having one arm tied behind our back, essentially, and having restrictions placed on what we can and can't do. We're already fighting a vastly larger country with enormous resources, with a massive army. We can't be expected to just indefinitely continue taking these hits without the ability to strike back.
Now, with President Trump's re-election, clearly there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding what he's going to do with regards to Ukraine. Do you think this flurry of activity, so, the US and UK giving permission, now France giving permission for missiles to be shot inside Russia, and Putin's launch of the hypersonic missile, do you think this is all trying to set the stage for when Trump gets into power and therefore influence the negotiation or negotiating position of all the parties?
Yes, very much so. I think at the moment what we're seeing is a jockeying for position. Everybody recognizes, I think, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and all of Ukraine's European allies recognize that early next year there will be at least an attempt to negotiations. There will be an attempt to spark and to kickstart the negotiating process and move towards some form of a settlement. Now, there's no guarantee it'll work. But of course, at this point, everyone's looking to find, to strengthen their positions and to make sure that they're in the best possible position as they go into those talks. From a Russian point of view, they're trying to present strength. Ukraine's trying to show that it has the full support of the West and it has the ability to strike back against Russia, so that Russia is trying to motivate essentially or pressure Russia into those talks. So Russia at the moment is advancing on the battlefield, is in a strong position. So Ukraine really needs to change that equation if they want to bring Russia to the table and get some sort of a viable peace deal. And that applies to Trump as well. I think Trump is a great deal maker in his own mind. He likes to see himself as a deal maker. He is a businessman primarily, and he must understand you can't have a successful negotiation if you negotiate from a position of weakness. So at the moment, Ukraine's priority really is to strengthen its negotiating position.
Yes, well, how is it going to do that? 20% of its landmass has been occupied by Russia. I think Putin's going to be unwilling and unlikely to withdraw from that. Is there a mood in Ukraine that people would be prepared to give up land for peace?
I think there's a growing recognition that some form of concessions, territorial concessions, will be necessary. Now, no Ukrainian leader, and I don't think many Ukrainians in general, will ever officially recognize the loss of territory, but they may accept a kind of a Korean divide or a temporary occupation along a front line, along a demarcation line as part of a peace deal. I think that a lot will depend on the broader terms of any proposed deal, specifically security guarantees. So if, for example, Ukraine were offered something that was seen by the Ukrainians to be a genuine, credible security guarantee, which realistically is either NATO membership or the equivalent of NATO membership, in terms of security guarantees from the West, then the idea of accepting, even on a temporary basis, the loss of these territories becomes possible. But if the proposal is simply write off these territories and accept neutrality and basically wait for Russia to come for you again, I think Ukrainians will say, no, we'd rather fight on. However dire the situation is, it's better to fight on now than to accept these very, very negative terms and then just wait for Russia to rearm and come again. We'd rather continue now. So a lot will depend on the broader picture, not just the territorial aspect. But yes, I think fundamentally, in answer to your question, there is a recognition that there may need to be some very painful decisions with regard to the demarcation line and the territories that are held by Russia now.
Understood. Now, recently, Russia has intensified its bombing of Kyiv. How is that still at the same intensity, or has it calmed down a little bit?
Well, it ebbs and flows. I mean, Kyiv has been under bombing pretty intensively for months now. But we also must bear in mind that Kyiv is one of the most, or probably the most, protected airspace in Ukraine. The situation is far more dangerous and far more challenging, far more stressful, traumatic for people in other cities. So people in Kharkiv, which is very close to Russia, very close to the front lines. Dnipro, which was struck just in recent days with this ballistic missile. Odessa down in the south on the Black Sea. Those cities, they're all big cities. They're all around 1 million people in each city. I mean, there's a large populations. They're much more exposed. So they're really, really suffering. Of course, people in Kiev also experiencing many sleepless nights, but the air cover is better there. So, I would stress that. I think, the real challenges are elsewhere.
Indeed. Well, tragedies happening all along the eastern border of Ukraine. Peter Dickinson, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up.